There are many strong meta cards in Marvel Snap that will help you win many games that most of us already know about. But there's some other cards out there that I think a lot of people are sleeping on that'll also help you to win games, sneak up, and win many cubes for your opponents. And that is what we're talking about in this video. So if you're ready for all of that, you know what to do. Find that like button. Let's go smash it.
ValleyFlyin.
Hello, Valley Maniacs. Welcome back to the Valley Snap channel. I'm ValleyFlyin. I hope you're having a great day. In this video, we're talking about the most underrated cards that people are sleeping on. These are the cards that will help you win some games in Marvel Snap that not a lot of people are using in their decks. I wanted to highlight them, and hopefully you could include some of these cards in some decks you're using to make them a little stronger. But before we get into all that, if you haven't already subscribed, we talk about Marvel Snap on this channel. If you want more great Marvel Snap content, hit that subscribe button for some of the great decks that we're working on, some of the countdown lists like this, and other news, tips, tricks to help your Marvel Snap experience. But with that said, let's get right into this list. Now, this list is in the order of their cost. So let's start with the lowest cost card on this list, or one of the lowest cost cards on this list, and this is GOOSE. Now, what GOOSE does, nobody, which means you and your opponent, cannot play cards that cost 4, 5, or 6 at this location. So what this is going to do is limit some of the stronger cards that your opponent can play. And if you're using a Silver Surfer type of deck, or a deck with Sarah where you're just overloading your opponents with a bunch of cards at the end, GOOSE is a perfect card to limit what your opponent can play at that location. So some of the great synergies that go along with GOOSE, obviously we talked about Silver Surfer and the Sarah decks, but Brood is one card that can give you a lot of cards all at once, overload your opponents at that location, and especially if you have Silver Surfer popping up, that's all those 3 cost cards. Silver Surfer is going to increase the value of all those cards, so you can really limit what your opponent does and kind of stifling what they are able to do in their deck. So GOOSE is very, very underrated, and yeah, don't be asleep on GOOSE. I include him in a lot of these decks with Sarah, Silver Surfer, and Brood is a card that goes especially well with him. Next is Colossus. Now, Colossus was a card that I used a lot back in Pool 1, Pool 2, and is still very good in some of these ongoing decks. I use a lot of Colossus in the Destroyer decks, and has a lot of good synergy with Spectrum because he is an ongoing card. Now, where Colossus started to get a little more prominent was with the introduction of Luke Cage, because what Luke Cage does is it doesn't allow your cards to be reduced. So what this is doing is allowing a lot of these Hazmat Wong plays, which is going to reduce all the costs on your side if your opponent plays that, but it won't do that to Colossus. So this is a great card if your opponent, if you start to see those Wongs and those Hazmats pop up, Colossus cannot be reduced, also cannot be moved. So cards like Magneto, or actually would be Polaris or Arrow, that would move cards around, Colossus is gonna stay in that spot. And it could also mitigate some location changes like Asgard, which is going to move all your cards to the right. So great card here. Colossus, I think, is a lot of cards that everybody used back in Pool 1 and Pool 2 days. But with some of the new meta, some of these new tactics that people are using, Colossus is a card that is gaining a little more traction in the current meta now. Next card I want to talk about is Juggernaut. Now, Juggernaut is a card that I did not use, but one of the favorite synergies I have with Juggernaut is using in conjunction with Storm. So normally what I used to do is Storm followed by Jessica Jones, but what I like doing nowadays is Storm followed by Juggernaut. Because if your opponent tries to play a card on that next turn to try to win some points or steal that location from you that you're storming, well, Juggernaut's gonna knock them off that location. On reveal, if your opponent played a card here on this turn, you're gonna move them to a random location, which is very, very nice. The benefit that he has over Jessica Jones, he costs a little less. And if you're using him in conjunction with Silver Surfer, he is a 3 cost card, so you're gonna get a little more power if you have that Silver Surfer on that final turn. Now, the downside is Jessica Jones is gonna give you a little more power at that location, but she costs a little bit more, which means you're gonna play that 4 cost card on that 4th turn if you're storming that location on turn 3. So Juggernaut gives you a little more flexibility. You could play another 1 cost card along with Juggernaut, or get that extra power with Silver Surfer because he is a 3 cost card. So I like Juggernaut. Juggernaut's a card that I think people are sleeping on, but got a little more prominent with that Silver Surfer introduction that season. So Juggernaut's a great card, and especially if you're using a Silver Surfer deck or using Storm, Juggernaut has great synergy with both of those cards. Next card I want to talk about is Polaris. Now, Polaris is a card that's another 3-cost card. So obviously all these 3-cost cards have a great synergy with Silver Surfer because of the bonus that Silver Surfer does. But Polaris also comes with the fact that it's a 3-cost, 5-power card. So it's a decent amount of power for 3 costs. And what it's going to do on reveal, move an opposing 1 or 2 cost card to the location of player. So it gives you some location control. What I like to use this card for is a location that the opponent has armored. So they're planning to set a location, and if you move that armor from that location, especially if that opponent is running a destroy deck and are counting on that location, those cards being protected, you move that armor away from that location, that could screw up a lot of their plans. And sometimes just moving that armor away from that location gives you an easy cubes from their opponent retreating. So Polaris is a card that's included in a lot of the decks that you see on this channel, but I don't see Polaris used a lot. I don't see her played a lot against me. So if you don't have Polaris in a deck, and especially if you're running Silver Surfer, Polaris is a great addition in these control decks, in these Silver Surfer decks. A lot of synergy that you get with Polaris. All right, moving on to the next card, we have Sandman. Now this card is very controversial. It has that effect like Electro does, except it doesn't give you the ramp, and it comes with the downside. It only has 1 power for 4 costs, so not a very good card in terms of power and energy usage. But what it gives you is the ongoing ability that players can only play 1 card per turn. And in these meta, with a lot of these Zoo decks going around, we have a lot of these Sarah decks going around, negative decks going around, just overloading the board. Well, you can limit what your opponent does. So this is more of a counter play with this. Now, what I like to do with Sandman is get him out early. Get him out not on turn 4, but on turn 3 with a card like Psylocke on turn 2. Then you follow up with Sandman on turn 4. Now, you do need to have the proper cards for this, because if you are trying to play a Sarah deck or something like that, this would not work. So Sandman works very good, but you need the other cards. So you would need some high value cards, a lot of great 4-cost cards, a lot of 5-cost cards, and all your 6-cost cards to win that game at the end. So Sandman is very, very good. It helps to counter a lot of the meta decks that are in the game right now. Next is Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Man, this may not be an underrated card. If you saw my video yesterday about the nastiest deck that I'm using right now with a lot of location control, because what Spider-Man does on reveal, your opponent cannot play cards at this location next turn. Now, this is a 4-cost card, but I don't like to play them on turn 4. I like to play this card on turn 5. So this pairs very well with a card like Daredevil, where you can see what your opponent is doing on turn 5, and then you could lock down one of the locations so they can't play anything on turn 6, especially if you know kind of what their plans are. You can kind of see what their plans are on that turn 5. So Spider-Man locks down that location, especially if you lock down a separate location like we talked about in our deck yesterday with Storm. So you lock down one location with Storm, you lock down another location with Spider-Man, giving your opponent 1 lane to plan. This card is very, very strong, very underrated. And like I said, I like to play this card on turn 5 and not on turn 4. And it really frustrates your opponent. A lot of times we don't even get to that final match, because as they're locked out on turn 6, you'll get an easy retreat from them. So if I know I'm playing Spider-Man on turn 5, usually I'll hit that snap a little early, because as soon as they see they're locked out of everything, they get an easy retreat. So, you get that early snap so you can get two cubes instead of 1 cube when they retreat. But Spider-Man is very, very nasty and frustrates your opponents a lot. Next card that it could be very, very frustrating is Enchantress. And this is a great card to counter some of the meta cards that are going around, like the Wong decks. They can have some crazy power. You got these onslaught decks, Mystique decks. Enchantress on reveal. So unfortunately, this is not an ongoing card that's going to remove all the ongoing stuff. So if anything gets played after Enchantress, well, it's still going to have its ongoing ability. But Enchantress removes all the ongoing abilities from the cards at this location. So not just yours, but your opponent's as well. So if you've had not a Maximus, if you had a Lizard at your location, this could also benefit you combining with Enchantress. But this is a very good counter card. So if your opponent plays one of those Patriot decks or one of these Wong decks, you see that come out, well, that's going to ruin their day if you play this Enchantress. hopefully they weren't expecting you to counter them with that. Cosmo Walk Sleep works very good as well, but Enchantress just removes all the abilities from them, so I like that as well. All right, next, Rescue. On reveal, if you play a card here next turn, you get an extra 5 power. So essentially, this is a 4/9 card. So for 4 costs, you get 9 power on the board, which is strong, especially if you play a card like Professor X after this, which is a very tough location to beat, especially if you can't do anything on that final turn to win that location. So usually if you play Rescue and Professor X on one lane, that is a lane that you've already won, then you just got to concentrate on winning that a second lane to get that victory. Another card that synergizes very well with Rescue is Captain Marvel, because Captain Marvel can move after you've played this and giving that extra 4/9. You know, 4/9 value is insane. It's better than Jessica Jones. It's better than a lot of the card to the cost to power ratio of a lot of these cards in the deck. So Captain Marvel going into Rescue. Another card that works kind of like Captain Marvel with a little extra power is Vision. Now, Vision is a card that you would have to move manually on turn 6. Captain Marvel moves on her own to win you a location, but all 3 of these cards, Professor X, Captain Marvel, and Vision, all work very good with Rescue, and I don't see Rescue being played a lot, but when I do see Rescue, I'm like, uh-oh. Let's see what they got. Are they going to Professor X her? Are they going to rescue her? Are they going to Captain Marvel her? You know, it's a strong play and a lot of tempo with this Rescue card. Next card I want to talk about is Claw. Now, Claw is a card that is very sneaky, and this is a card that a lot of people don't suspect you winning. So this is great for some of these locations that you can't get to, like a Storm location or the Sanctum Sanctorum that you cannot access, that you can't play cards at that location at all. So what it's going to do, ongoing, the location on the right has +6 power, so you need to play this in the correct location. You need to be careful where you play this, because it could just be a 5/4 card, which is horrible value. But if you play this correctly, it's essentially 5 cost for putting 10 power on the board, which is really good. And then you could double that with a card like Onslaught, or you could get that card again with a card like Mystique. So Claw is very good for winning those locations. It can really sneak up on your opponents. You know, they're usually not suspecting that extra 6 power, and 6 power at a location is very strong, especially if it's like a lockdown location like we talked about that your opponent cannot access. And the final card that I want to talk about is GAMORA. Now, GAMORA is a great card in the early pools, and this is a card that I don't see played a lot, but on reveal, if your opponent played a card here on the next turn, you're gonna get +5 power. So like a lot of these Guardians cards, you need to predict correctly for this card to play. Now, because it's a 5 cost card, usually you can anticipate where your opponent is gonna go, and you could get that 5/12 power, which is very strong. That's essentially Hulk power on turn 5. But you're gonna need to guess where your opponent plays. So if you combine her with a card like Daredevil, well, you would automatically get that power. So strong card to play here, and 5/12 is nothing to sleep at. And those are, in my opinion, the most underrated cards nowadays in the current meta. Let me know what you think are the most underrated cards. Are some of these cards rated correctly and very strong, like Spider-Man, like I said? Or are there some cards that I forgot to leave off this list? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button. It helps the algorithm. It helps us to grow this channel. If you haven't already followed me on social media, check me out there. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your day. Hulk fist bump. ValleyFlyin out. Have a great one, guys.